Liberty Talks event. We do this once a month. We pick a topic. Tonight our topic's going to be court reform. And just to introduce you, David Johnson is our county chair, and he's doing an amazing job. We hit a milestone today, didn't we?
Yesterday we hit 500 likes on our Facebook page.
Woohoo! That's a big deal for us.
It's
We've
30.
been around a little over a year.
So we had about 370 2 months ago. So it's like a 35+% growth. It's pretty rapid,
Yeah.
pretty huge.
So, and I don't know if you all are watching on Facebook and social media, I assume, but the political climate is changing, shifting, so that's really encouraging. And you guys represent the 3% that's actively engaged. Imagine if we could grow that. We could really change some stuff. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I happen to be a paralegal. I've been working 10 years helping folks who are trying to fight the big banks. Not that I'm against banks entirely, but the reality is they've kind of gained in the system. And I would say that foreclosures is one of the contributing factors to our homelessness problem. If you think about it, these homeowners lost their homes. A lot of times they were gamed out of their homes, and I could tell you all about that. I'm not going to go into it now. But then they become renters, and then that puts a demand on the rental market, and rents go up, on top of the growth in the area and some other factors as well. So one of my frustrations has been what I've seen in the court system. When I realized what had gone on with the foreclosure situation, I did some research back in about 2008, 2009. It woke me up and I thought, well, I'm kind of a fighter. I wanted to do something about it. And I thought, well, shoot, we got this fantastic justice system. Surely that's where these people will, find justice. Well, after 10 years, I'm here to say, no money, no justice. I hate to say that, but that's really how it is. And so we need massive court reform. And I have some thoughts on that. I don't know if you guys know, if you've not been involved in the court system, but it's super, super complicated. Just like other areas, you guys are frustrated with the bureaucracy, the layers and layers of bureaucracy we deal with. Well, that's the court system. Every single jurisdiction has different court rules. There's different levels. You've got the federal, if you've got your superior, your district, they're all different rules. This drives up court costs. Most people, or legal fees, I should say. Well, and there are court costs. For example, King County, I have to literally go down on a family law case, go down to the court to get my documents on cases that we are on. That's ridiculous. I can't download them. But there's multiple platforms, layers of court rules, and what this does is it's very time consuming, and most attorneys bill hourly, and it gets very expensive. So what that does is that pretty much means people don't have access to attorneys. And so sometimes people try to, handle their situations pro se, but a lot of these cases, you can have the best facts in the world, but there's all this procedure, and if you don't know the procedure, you can lose on a technicality. You probably know all about that, and maybe you too. So, our court system needs some change, and so we're here to talk about that a little bit tonight with respect to one area of law, and that's going to be family law, because Kyle, that's kind of your area of expertise. Kyle is with Family Court Reform USA. I think one of your chief concerns is co-parenting, 50-50 parenting. We actually, right now, we don't have that in Washington State. Typically, courts kind of lean towards the mother, and that in a lot of cases just really is sort of unfair, and it's not necessarily in the best interest of the child. And it also, because you have this sort of scenario, you end up getting two parents that are fighting for custody over the kids. Court fees go up, legal fees go up, and actually, what I see in our practice is it doesn't give the parents the opportunity to get some closure and start to rebuild. Because the reality is, if you have children with this other parent, you are effectively co-parenting for the next 18 years. You need to learn how to cooperate and get together. and co-parent that child for the best interest of the child. But the problem is we have an adversarial system that pits the parents against each other. So I actually think this is a good move. And without further ado, I'm going to let Kyle take the floor, and we're going to start. You're going to do your presentation. We'll have a question and answer afterward. And once again, thank you so much for coming out. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for the great intro, Michelle. My name is Kyle Paskewitz. As Michelle said, I founded an organization called Family Court Reform USA. I'm also the chairman of an organization called Parental Link, and I'm running for state representative in the 27th District, Tacoma. I'd like to start off by just kind of introducing myself a little bit and kind of telling you guys a little bit about my history and what kind of brought me here. I was actually raised on the East Coast. I grew up in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., and it was the military that originally brought me out here. I went to the University of Maryland, got my bachelor's degree in computer science, and then 9/11 happened. And as I'm watching this on the TV, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this is something that we need to stand up for. We need to protect our country. I come from a military family. It was something that I very strongly believed in. So I joined the military. I served for 4 years with the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, deployed twice to Afghanistan. When I came back to Washington, I got my master's degree in information technology, and then I went back into the field of IT, which is what I did before I was in the military, and became a project manager. I worked for large organizations, Microsoft, Intel, worked for some small companies, started my own business, started a couple of nonprofits. So I've got a pretty broad range of experience. Prior to joining the military, I had worked for IBM, and I actually worked for a number of government organizations as a contractor as well. So pretty broad range of experience that I have. What kind of changed my pathway was when I got divorced in 2010. I was exposed to the family court system, and it was it was one of these situations where as a veteran, I just had this kind of natural assumption that my constitutional rights were going to be upheld, that we had processes, that we had laws, that we were going to go through this this process, that the truth would be told. They would do everything in the best interest of my kids, and ultimately, we would come out with some kind of agreement that was going to work for everybody. Well, that's not how it worked at all. And, I recall kind of being warned by some people, hey, you go through a divorce, you're going to lose your shirt, and I'm like, well, bad things happen sometimes, but, really, I didn't have a lot of assets. Didn't have a lot of problems. I mean, obviously there were problems with my marriage, or else we wouldn't have got divorced. However, it was one of these situations where going into it, we actually agreed and sat down and kind of worked everything out. Wound up, filing together, filed for a 50-50 parenting plan, and then at some point that changed. I assume what happened was my ex met with an attorney, and then the whole balance of things changed, and unfortunately it led to a very long kind of prolonged court battle between myself and my ex. So Family Court Reform USA, I have this presentation I put together. I haven't actually given this presentation in quite a while, so work with me here if I have to consult with my notes. But I founded the organization back in 2014 because of the need that I saw. That there was a lot of issues with the court system, that the laws needed to change, that was probably the only one of the only ways that we were going to be able to drive change in the court system was actually to change the laws. I think that there's a number of other approaches that we need to address as well. But that's part of what I've been working on, and has kind of sent me on this journey that I'm on. So. Family Court Reform USA, we're a national organization. Our goal is to protect the rights of children, parents, and families in family court. We've been working with legislators for a number of years now, to try to drive several different measures through the courts, and I believe or through the legislature to change some of the laws. And I believe that that's just a start. I believe that the problems that we have in the court system are probably going to take many, many years to address. But we've got to start somewhere, and I think that that starts with the fundamental rights of parents. So our organization started off as a social media movement, essentially. Started off with a Facebook page. We expanded out. We started with a national page. We expanded out to 50 state pages. I got involved with a number of other organizations. I believe I mentioned earlier, I'm the chairman of Parental Link. That's another nonprofit organization that's a national organization that was founded by a woman who was dealing with parental alienation, and she wanted to start an organization to try to address that as well. And one thing I'd like to back up a little bit because I forgot to mention when I first got involved with with trying to reform the family court system, I had watched a documentary called Divorce Corp. I don't know, have any of you guys seen Divorce Corp? Looks like most of you guys have seen it. If you haven't, it's on Netflix. You can also go to their website and check it out. What Divorce Corp exposed was the family court industry, essentially. And there was a guy named Joe Sorge who had gone through the family court system in Sacramento, California, and he was a movie producer. And when he went through this experience, he saw some of the same problems that I've identified and so many other people have identified across the country. And he decided, well, his contribution is going to be, I'm going to create a documentary, I'm going to create a movie about it, and that's going to blow the thing wide open, and then everybody's going to know. Well, it was kind of the start of a process, but unfortunately, like most documentaries, it kind of got buried on Netflix, and there's a lot of people who have seen it. It's a very great production. I highly recommend watching it because it shows these problems in detail, and it shows how people actually stood up against the court system and were able to identify these people that were doing some really, really terrible things. And essentially what had happened down in California is they had created kind of this cottage industry where the guardian ad litems, the attorneys, the judges, the supervised visitation centers, the domestic violence assessors, all of these people were essentially working in collusion just to hand each other business. They didn't care about what was actually happening to the parents and the families. They cared about all this money that they were making. And they exposed this thing wide open. There were people that were prosecuted for it. And there have been other scandals that have gone on with our court system throughout our country that have exposed a lot of these problems. The thing is it's happening all over. And we can address it on a local level. We can identify, people that are blatantly breaking the law. But there's a lot of underlying things that are, that are fundamentally wrong with the system to begin with that even allow some of these things to happen. So, with Divorce Corp, Joe Sorge was the producer of that movie. After he created the documentary, I believe he decided to kind of get out of fighting the court system and hand that off to other people, which frequently happens because it's such a difficult problem to combat. The lifespan for most people is a few years, if that, and then they're so burned out on trying to fight this overwhelming system that usually people just kind of step out of it and have to take care of themselves and their own lives. So Joe is kind of out, but what he did is he set up a number of committees, and he provided a platform for all of these committees to be able to communicate. And that's how I met a lot of the people that I know across the country that were concerned about these issues and wanted to fight them at a higher level and essentially use the system to change the system and make it better. I became the chair or co-chair of the Constitutional Challenges Committee. There were a couple other people that I worked with to discuss the constitutionality of family law. There were a number of other committees that were dealing with child support, alimony reform, alternative dispute resolution, mediation, all various aspects of the family court industry that all could use some change and need to be addressed. So ultimately, that's kind of how I got my start before I founded my organization. What we have now is, like I said, we've got a national organization. We've got It says, I don't know if you guys can even read that, but it says we've got about 15,000 followers nationwide. I think it's probably a lot greater than that now because we've got about 60 social media pages just on Facebook alone. And then we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got LinkedIn, we've got all these different pages. So we're using the technology to try to reach out to as many people as possible, which is one of those things that we haven't been able to do for many years, and probably one of the reasons why this problem has festered for so long and gone unaddressed. So I'm gonna,
Kyle,
yeah.
Haven't you had a few wins recently? A couple of states have actually passed the co-parenting. It wasn't one like last week.
So with shared parenting, there's been a pretty strong national movement for a number of years. And it started in 2016, I believe there were 17 states that had some sort of shared parenting bill, including Washington, that were going in front of their legislature. And actually in 2016, I believe, Florida actually passed one through both houses of their Congress, and it wound up being vetoed by their governor. This has kind of been the history of this. We've had all these states that are proposing them. There were 17 of them in 2016. I think there were about 25 of them in 2017, and then in 2018 there have been about 30. And there have been a couple of wins. Kentucky just passed a shared parenting law, and then just last week Virginia passed one. The interesting thing about that, and I'm gonna go off script a little bit here since we're talking about that. That was one of the things that I was going to bring up. We're definitely making progress. We're getting laws changed, but what I'm seeing is it's very, very slow, incremental change. And anybody that's defended themselves in court or gone through the process knows that a few words can make a big difference in the way that a law is written. But it's also in how that court interprets those words, and if those words aren't strong enough, sometimes it doesn't really change anything. And so my concern with some of the laws that are passed is that they're just not strong enough. That's my personal opinion. I don't mean to diminish any of the wins that we've already had. The Kentucky bill was actually a lot stronger than the Virginia bill, because what the Kentucky bill did is it essentially established a presumption of equality between two fit parents. And it's what they call a rebuttable presumption, which is good, but one of the things that they really fought them on was they still wanted to make it a very strongly rebuttable presumption, which we already have. I mean, there are 50-50 parents in the state of Washington and across the country. If it's argued the right way in court in front of the right judge and the two parents agree, you can get a 50-50 case. The problem is when the two parents don't agree. Then we have this issue of there's a fundamental difference between the way these two parents are treated, and we believe that the fundamental rights of parents should always be upheld. I brought my sign here, which I didn't really have a chance to post up, but this is kind of one of our mottos here, which is parental rights are human rights. I believe this is a fundamental constitutional issue where the state is essentially taking away our fundamental right to be a parent.
So are you saying that even in cases where both parents walk into the court, they're like, yeah, I want to go 50-50, yeah, I want to go 50-50, the judge will knock down that arrangement and change it?
I've heard of some cases like that. I have not heard of that happening in Washington, but I wouldn't doubt that that does happen, because the court does have that full discretion. So if the court comes in and wants to make that decision for parents, they have the authority to do that under the current laws. It tends to be a situation where one parent disagrees. One parent may be asking for 50, the other parent may say, well, I want full custody, and then the court isn't upholding the right of that parent that's saying, hey, I just want a fair arrangement, I just want 50% of the time with my kids. They're violating the fundamental right of that parent that just wants that even split of time. So
I was going to say, to be specific on the law, it says in Washington State that joint custody is the default, but one of the exceptions is one parent not wanting it.
Exactly. And that's actually what, so the first bill that we proposed was well, let me back up a little bit. There was a bill in 2015 and 2016 that was a shared parenting bill. It was HB 1110 proposed by Chris Reichtel, who was he was a representative in the House at the time. He's now the superintendent of public schools, very well respected legislator here in Washington. He had proposed this shared parenting bill. Unfortunately, it didn't get any traction in the House because of the way that the committee, there's a House Judiciary Committee that it has to go through, and if the House Judiciary Committee doesn't want to push that bill forward, it goes nowhere. So we proposed another bill that actually had much stronger language. So in 2017, we proposed HB 1554, which was sponsored by Representative Larry Haler, and that bill, what it did is it established what we already know, which that it's in the best interest of children when they have two fit parents to essentially have equal time with both parents. And that's one of those things that the state of Washington knows this. The state of Washington teaches that in their parenting classes that they make you go through when you go through a child custody case. That's one of the things that they, that we've got decades worth of research on. We have international organizations that are putting out papers, from experts all around the world that are coming out saying that this is in the best interest of children. Unfortunately, it's still not what the court system is doing. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to define that in the best interest standard, to say it is in the best interest of children to have essentially equal time with both parents, and if one or both parties was making the claim that that wasn't in the best interest of the children, that they should have to establish that through clear and convincing evidence. And right now, what we have is called the preponderance of evidence, and I'll get into that a little bit more as I kind of get into my presentation. But there are two different standards of evidence. The preponderance of evidence is basically 49-51. So if the judge just kind of leans a little bit this way and says, this is what I think is better, the judge essentially has the authority to make that decision for the parents. What that actually violates is numerous Supreme Court precedents, including a major case that was that took place here in the state of Washington. A lot of you guys might be familiar with Troxel versus Granville, which essentially established that that nobody can override the rights of a fit parent, that a fit parent acts in the best interest of their children, and unless it's established that that parent is unfit in some way, that they have the right to make those decisions. So we have all of this court precedent. We have all of the evidence from the child development experts, from the child psychologists. We're teaching this in the state of Washington, but the court system just hasn't caught up to that. So back to HB 1554, the first thing that it established is that it is in the best interest of children to have equal time with both parents. If one of those parents feels that that's not in the kid's best interest, they have to establish it through clear and convincing evidence. And if the judge does decide that the evidence has been presented and decides to not award what one of those fit parents is asking for, they have to document what evidence it was that they considered and what their rationale is. And I think that better protects parents that are in this situation. And that bill's actually got quite a bit of support here in Washington so far. Sir, you have a question?
In this state, DSHS handles the enforcement of the non-custodial parents and family court stuff. I don't know if you're aware of that, or...
So DSHS, the Division of Child Support, enforces the collection of child support, but they don't enforce parenting plans.
So, yeah, DSHS was developed by Frank Chop before he became the Speaker of the House. And a lot of those laws and parenting plans that are in place that you're dealing with right now were developed by Frank Chop in an effort to create customers for the homeless industrial complex of Seattle. Frank Chop ran human services in the city of Seattle. He moved on to DSHS before he became Speaker of the House.
Interesting.
The reason you have all these problems with DSHS is because it's a Frank Chop skim organization. It's bloated and inflated. The contracts are handed out in an old boy fashion. And if you were to look at Frank Chop's engineering of DSHS and the family court system, you will learn quite a bit of why you're having problems.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for your input. Can we keep questions to the end if they're going to be long?
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you. No problem.
I thought it was...
Just trying to help give them a
Well,
clear
no,
road
it's
here.
okay. I mean, I wasn't aware of that, but what I do know is that the federal funding is what drives the family court system, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. I mean, I've talked to U.S. congressional candidates that are unaware of what Title IV D and E under the Social Security Act are, and essentially what that is it's our Social Security fund that has been being used for what they call welfare programs. And some of those programs that fall under DSHS are the collection of child support, CPS, the foster care system. So the state is actually collecting money to operate these systems. And one of those repercussions with Title IV-D, the child support collection system, if they have a non-custodial parent, then they have what they feel is a justification to collect child support from that non-custodial parent. So what that does is it actually creates an incentive for them to want to have more non-custodial parents because the state gets funding to collect that child support. So it's one of those systems that's kind of self-perpetuating because they have to keep that system in place to keep the federal funding going. And what that's doing is it's ultimately depleting our Social Security fund, and we wonder why we don't have enough funds when we retire. You know, that they keep saying, well, the funds are going to run out in Social Security. It's because how they're spending it. Little bit of a side issue, but it's one of many issues that we have where, you know, I've heard a lot of people say that the family court system is a state issue, but it's not completely a state issue because there's a bunch of federal laws and there's a bunch of funding that are happening at that federal level that drive the entire system. So that's another thing a lot of people aren't aware of. I try to raise as much awareness about that as possible. I know as a state representative, I'm not going to be able to do anything about Title IV, but we've got a lot of people that are working on that at the federal level that believe that system needs to change. Title IV-E is actually the funding that goes to the foster care system and CPS, and there have been a number of significant changes in the way that they're handling, the way that they're doling out those federal funds now, because they identified all of these problems in those systems as well. And so we're expecting that Title IV-D is probably the next to follow. So I have a graphic here. I don't know if you guys can see this real well, but basically what we have is a kind of a group of gears that are kind of working together. We have on one of these gears we have the financial incentives, which is the Title IV federal funding that I was referring to. You know, there's also, and not to disparage any attorneys. You know, I know a lot of people are very down on the law industry in general because they think that the attorneys you know, can exacerbate these problems. I know a lot of people that can pretty much prove that was the case, that their cases were drawn out because there is a financial incentive to keep that case in court as long as possible, to litigate versus mediate, or to litigate versus settle. And that's a pretty big problem when you're talking about families and children and fundamental rights. You know, if you've got attorneys that are not doing the right thing and are not trying to do the best for their clients, you know, they can profit massively off of that. So that's another one of those financial incentives as well. There's that other gear is the adversarial processes in family court. Essentially, you know, if you've got two people that are being put into a system that is adversarial by nature, where one person is essentially going to come out the winner, the other person's going to come out the loser, you know, that's going to have less rights to their child. The other person is going to get the house, the car, the kids, the big check, everything like that. You're automatically putting these two people in conflict when they go into court, and there's no real incentive for them to want to work things out if it's not going to come out even. Both people want to come out ahead. And so that creates this adversarial system where it's kind of an all or nothing scenario. You're going to have one person that comes out with all the rights and all the financial benefits and actually all the support of the court system as well, because once they name somebody as the primary parent, that non-custodial parent essentially becomes kind of a second-class citizen. They do not have the same rights at that point that that primary parent has. Regardless of whether you have joint custody or not, the court will not protect the rights of the non-custodial parent. There's kind of this automatic bias against those parents once that happens. So that's one of the reasons why I firmly believe that equality between the two parents is essentially the solution to this. If you have two fit parents, you know, try to eliminate this conflict as early on as possible. You know, and there's a lot of different ways to approach that. I think it needs to change in the law. I think we need a lot more mediation. I think we need a lot more oversight of the court system as well. But you know, I'd be happy to provide these slides for anybody that wants to, you know, kind of see them in more detail, but I've listed out how a lot of these different factors all kind of work together to create a problem. And I like to share this quote, you know, no offense to any of the folks in the law industry in the room, but this was something that my stepdad told me when he had gone through a very contentious divorce. And he said in family court, nobody wins except the attorneys. And you know, he was saying that to try to discourage me from getting divorced. Unfortunately, you know, there was really no going back at that point, and divorce was kind of inevitable. But you know, his point, you know, was that if you can avoid that system at all costs, avoid it, because it doesn't protect you. It's a system that's very, very adversarial and creates a lot of problems for a lot of people. So there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about here. There were a few other bills that we proposed in 2017. One of the things that you know, being a veteran, one of the things that I've done is I've talked to a lot of other veterans, and there's some very specific problems that veterans run into when they're dealing with family court issues, because they've got deployment cycles, they've got training cycles, they're away from their family for a long period of time. There's injuries that happen when people deploy overseas. You know, there's all sorts of things that veterans have to deal with that is a little bit different, you know, from the community at large. So we proposed a Veterans Protection Act to try to provide some better protection for veterans that go through family court. Data collection and reporting, I believe, is actually probably going to be one of the things that helps resolve this problem. We have a lack of data from the court system and a lack of modernization of the system in general, and it's one of the things that Michelle has hit upon. I know that that's a pain point for a lot of the people in the industry, because we've got all these different systems just from county to county in the state of Washington and all across the country for how a motion needs to be filed and how that data is tracked. We've had a number of studies that have come out that have provided information about that court system, but then they become defunded, you know, or right now, in order to get data about the court system, it takes, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks of time to do research, to put data together, to be able to present something, and it's often kind of dismissed. And we've had long-term studies and things done where they've researched all these things, and they've provided evidence about what the outcomes are in the court system. But you know, we don't have an ongoing system that gives us insight into what's actually happening, how these orders are being made, what the ultimate outcome is, what the percentages are of you know, which parents are getting primary custody, which are getting non-custodial custody, what are the different factors in these cases, how long are these cases being drawn out in court. There's a lot of questions that we could answer if we just recorded that data in a database and had some ongoing reporting. So as an IT guy, you know, I'm always looking at technology to improve things, and that's something that would give us a lot more insight into what the court system is doing and better protect our children, our parents, our families. I think that it's a really good direction to go. So it's something that I proposed. We didn't get a sponsor for that. I'm hoping that in 2019 we'll get a sponsor for that particular bill. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about, down in California, the legislature down there ordered an audit on the Commission on Judicial Performance. And What that is it's the commission that oversees judges. So if a complaint is made against a judge, the commission reviews that complaint and they decide if any disciplinary action needs to be taken against that judge. Well, if you can find this data on any state website that shows what their commission does, and what you're going to find is that the disciplinary rate on judges is abysmally low. I mean, we're talking less than 2% of complaints that are filed in almost any state that you look at result in any kind of disciplinary action. So they're taking about 98% of complaints that are filed against judges and just completely dismissing them and saying, well, we're not going to do anything about this. That's a pretty big problem. If that is the only oversight that we have on the judicial system and they're not doing anything about it, and the other thing that you'll see, if you actually research when they're disciplining these judges, what they're disciplining them for, it tends to be things like, it tends to be personal misconduct. So a DUI, a sexual harassment case, the one that I always like to bring up that was really, really blew my mind was there was a judge that was disciplined because he was parking in the carpool spot when he wasn't in a carpool. And so you've got all these people that are saying, my constitutional rights have not been upheld. They didn't protect my family. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They're not doing what our tax dollars are paying them to do, which is to provide justice. They're making these complaints, and then the commissions are completely throwing them out. But they're disciplining a guy who was parking in the carpool spot. So I see that as a fundamental problem.
Because they aren't the courthouse there, not any people that matter.
Right, apparently. Michelle.
Can I make a point to that?
Please.
And I'll tell you, these judges are powerful. I see the attorneys, even my own husband, for example, when they interact, they have got these attorneys almost brainwashed. These judges are like gods. And you mentioned that they don't get disciplined. Well, very few attorneys or anyone else really is able to file a complaint against a judge because they can make your life a living hell.
Right.
They can make that attorney's life, they can ruin their career. So these judges are left pretty much unchecked. And the other problem is a lot of them are federal judges are appointed, but a lot of judges are elected. And raise your hand if you pay any attention to who you vote for judge.
Well,
maybe
most of the
We're
time
probably a unique crowd in this room.
Most of the time they're unopposed.
It is easy to get the information though.
But most of the time, nobody
You have
pays
to
any
really
attention. And from my perspective, I've been involved in politics and judicial system. I think the election of judges is almost more important than the legislators.
I agree.
Because these judges, they are affecting people's lives every single day. And you get a bad judge, and I don't know.
Well,
it's almost like luck of the draw.
You're absolutely right, and people, I think that people have feared for years to speak out against these things because I started to talk about this audit that they're doing in California. One of the things that led up to this is the guy that worked with the legislature to get this audit ordered was actually fined like $25,000 and put in jail by a judge over a frivolous charge that was made against him. And we believe that it was a retaliatory measure for him speaking out against what happened to him in his family court case. And so when judges have that much power to do that to somebody, it tends to discourage people from wanting to speak out. And it certainly tends to discourage, attorneys from wanting to say anything because their career depends on that. And there have been attorneys who've been disbarred for trying to fight against judges, and that's a big problem as well.
What other situation does everyone in the room have to rise when I walk in the room?
Right.
I mean, that in itself.
Not many. In the military, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, David.
I was going to say, I know in Snohomish County, 2/3 the judges up there began their career as an appointment by the governor and continued that seat running as an incumbent unopposed. Just to give you an example. So there's your democracy. There is no oversight. You've got the Code of Judicial Conduct. A judge sits on that. In this state, it's a judge, an attorney, and I can't remember, but basically they're peers. And I talked to an attorney who wanted to help me in Snohomish County, And they warned me that the fastest way for them to get disbarred was for them to file a complaint.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard that Snohomish County is absolutely one of the worst in the state of Washington. You know, I mean, I talk to parents all across the country, but you know, particularly here in Washington, because I've done so much work, and I mean, I've got a pretty good beat on what's going on in a lot of places here in the state, and Snohomish is bad. Snohomish is real bad.
Well, pro tip, you do get one mulligan. If it's early enough in your case, there's been no decisions yet, you can file an affidavit of prejudice. But you only get once, and you got to do it before there's been any sort of significant decision on the case.
Good to know.
You know what, I never understood that the state had an incentive, but the judges in King County, and I can't speak for anywhere else, often encourage the woman to garnish the man's wages. And that does multiple things. It makes them look irresponsible at work. It keeps them sometimes from getting a supervisory or a promotion. It looks bad on your credit. It costs more for the company. And I never understood if a man's going down and paying it or sending his check on time. I can see if they're not paying it, going to court and saying I need a garnishment. But
Right.
if they are doing it, the garnishment is a tool, you know, it's a hammer on somebody that doesn't deserve it.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, and interestingly enough, you know, in my own case, I was added to the child support system before I ever went to court. Before, you know, so basically it was decided that I was going to be the non-custodial parent and that I was going to pay child support before a court case was ever heard. And this was after. What, I'm sorry,
That sounds unconstitutional.
I believe it is unconstitutional. So another piece of data that we have from the state of Washington, they put out a residential time summary report. And I think that this data is really telling. They only did this report a couple of years, but essentially what this shows is, and I know it's probably a little bit difficult to see this, and what I'll do is I've actually got, and I apologize for the print quality here, but I've got a terrible printer, but I'm going to pass these around for you guys to kind of take a little bit of a better look at it. But what the residential time summary report showed is that the one on the left there, that is the percentage of time spent with the mom and spent with the dad when you have a split custody case. All right, so basically what you see on the right-hand side, it shows that the majority of the residential time winds up with the mom. The minority of the residential time winds up with the dad. So we know that that's true because that chart that's up at the top shows that you know, across the country, and the chart up at the top on the upper right-hand side, it basically shows that you know, throughout the course of the last 20 years or so, that it's been roughly 85% of the time kids wind up with their mom primarily, about 15% of the time they wind up with their dad. Well, one of the arguments that's been made is that they're saying, well, dads don't want more time with their kids. They're just saying, well, we want the mom to take care of the kids. And you know, and I'm not saying this to disparage moms in any way. I mean, I think that the roles of both parents are equally important. I think that most of us realize that, you know, moms are very important in their kids' lives and dads are very important in their kids' lives. But what this chart on the lower right shows is that it's not that the dads aren't asking for more time. Most of these cases where where these moms are getting a lot more time with their kids, these dads are asking for more time. You can see that, you know, there's no risk factors present in any of these cases, so there's no reason that the judge has to deny that parent their time. And it doesn't matter whether they're pro se or whether they have an attorney or not. Basically, it shows that you know, that they're rewarding most of that custodial time to the moms, even when the dads are asking for more time. So I don't want to belabor that point.
It takes a year and a half to get a court date in King County. I'm a divorced parent.
Yeah, yeah.
I got 3 kids. It took me a year and a half each time I wanted to do something.
Well, and that's one of the problems. I mean, these things drag on through court for years and years, and I believe that there's a lot of kind of social stigma and social ideas about, what is best for children and how they're making these decisions. But there was a survey done, and it was put out by an organization that I've worked with called Time to Put Kids First, and they put out some data. One of them was a survey that asked it basically asked the adult kids of divorce who had split time with their parents what they thought was best. Because we were always talking about, well, we want to do what's best for the children. So when you have an adult child of divorce, like myself, we have an opinion about what is best for us in our upbringing. So it's not just about what the parents are saying, it's about what the kids are saying. So you can look at that data in detail in those sheets that I'm passing around, but you can see from that green bar, those are the percentage of kids that think that equal time with both parents is best. So it's off the charts. The majority of kids are saying, look, I love both my parents. I want to spend time with both my parents. I get benefit from being with both my parents. So that's what the children want. Now we can look at the repercussions of what happens when we're doing something different from that, when we're deviating from that. Single-parent homes are correlated with virtually all of the social problems that we have in our country. So the youth suicide rate, 63% of those kids come from single-parent homes. 85% of children with behavioral problems come from single-parent homes. 85% of youth in prison come from single-parent homes. And the list goes on and on. You can talk about teen pregnancies. You can talk about drug use. You can talk about crime. Any of those statistics, they're all correlated back to these situations where kids are growing up in single-parent homes. So why is it that we're creating more single-parent homes when you have fit parents that want to be actively involved in their kids' lives? And I think we've answered what some of the reasons are and how we can address some of those things. But that's a really that's a really good graphic to take a look at if you guys want to see how some of these things are impacting our kids and our society.
We can take your slide deck there and post it on with the recording and on the Facebook page so people can get access to that because that's great data.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that.
Great.
So this was actually a little bit of an old presentation. I had a slide up from the Million Parent March was an event that we did. It was actually a march on Washington, D.C. that we did last year. It kind of started from a march that started here in Olympia. There was a guy named Cash Jackson who's actually the Libertarian candidate for governor in Illinois now. He started a march to all these different state capitals across the country and wound up in D.C. People from all over the country, including myself, came to meet him there in D.C. and we started kind of collaborating on what we could do about some of these situations, and that resulted in another march the next year. There was an event that they just had a week ago, which was a really good event. A number of people that were involved in some of those original marches and other people that are very active in trying to get family court reform pushed through the legislature and recognized on a national and federal level. They all met in D.C. for an event just recently, so there's a lot of stuff going on around the country. I feel very, very positive about the direction that all of this stuff is moving, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me and letting me present all this information to you. If you guys have any questions, the floor is open.
Go ahead.
Obviously, I don't live in Tacoma, but if I want to support your campaign, what can I do?
You can go to kylepaskewitz.com. That's my website. You can certainly, endorse me on the website there or take donations. If you want to get involved as a volunteer, I certainly need people to help me knock on doors and wave signs and everything else. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm also on Facebook, and I have some cards here. If you guys want to take a card, that's got a link to my website on there, so you can find me.
So, Universal Parentage Act passed this last session. What do you think of that? What were the repercussions in your area?
The Universal Parentage Act. Refresh my memory on
it. It was a huge bill that it had a bunch of stuff about surrogacy. It had parental custody stuff in it. I just aware it was a major bill, and I was just curious.
That sounds like what they nicknamed the Grandparents' Rights Bill.
Yes.
Okay, so it's interesting that you brought that up. I actually testified against that bill. And it's not because I completely disagree with the intent of the bill. I think that there were some important things that were brought up in that case, but effectively what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of roll back some of the things that came as a result of Troxel versus Granville, which uphold the right of fit parents. And the problem that you have here is in the state of Washington and pretty much every state across the country, you have this evidence standard where a judge or a court can come in there and take away the rights from one fit parent only based on a preponderance of evidence. But then when you have this case where you have, you have a grandparent or a third party, a family member or somebody else coming in trying to ask for custody or visitation, not custody, but visitation of that child, they're requiring a higher evidentiary standard than it takes to actually remove that right from a fit parent. So it's one of those issues that was decided in Troxel versus Granville that we need that higher evidentiary standard if you're going to take rights away from a parent, but they haven't addressed the fundamental issue which ultimately results sometimes in these other people wanting to ask for visitation. A lot of times what you have is one of these third parties, maybe a family member from the non-custodial parent, from their side of the family. So if they're petitioning for visitation with that child, it's because the rights of the non-custodial parent haven't been upheld. And if they focus more on upholding the rights of the non-custodial parent, then those rights actually confer to the children and the entire extended family of that other parent as well. So, yes, sir.
In regards to what you're talking about right there about the grandparents thing you were talking about,
yeah.
Catholic Community Services received a huge contract to administer that program out of 23rd and Yesler at the Randolph Carter Center.
Okay.
There's actually a young lady that works up there that does it. Her name is Lily. She's a really nice lady. She meets with the grandparents. When something like that is enacted, if you notice and look, contracts handed out to a nonprofit here in King County. So Catholic Community Services received a large contract when that came through.
I think that that's almost always an issue when it comes to the way that a lot of this legislation is driven. I mean, there are always organizations, there's financial factors, there's politics that are involved with the way that those things are decided. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, that is, understanding what are the driving factors for these things. Oftentimes, I think there is a separation between what it is that is best for the people and the will of the people, what the people actually want versus what's actually happening in our legislature. And that's one of the things that I seek to change when I get elected this year. So,
go ahead.
I got a couple questions. So, why go through the legislative versus like an initiative process? Have you tried an initiative process to see if that would, have more
Initiatives
power?
are really, really hard to get done in Washington State and really, really expensive.
Yeah.
So there's only a handful of initiatives are ever going to get on the ballot. There's only a handful of things that people are going to sign a petition for. So I mean, we could run 100 different initiatives, but there's only a couple of them that are going to bubble to the top, and it's usually the ones that are the best funded. I mean, just like anything, the initiative process, it takes people to go out and stand out there for hours and hours and hours and collect all these signatures. I mean, we're talking, what does it take, like 500,000 signatures or something to get an initiative on the ballot, something like that. I mean, that's a lot of signatures to have to gather for something. And the thing is one of the problems with the family court system is that the people that feel like their rights have been violated, they're usually spent when it comes to money because they're either broke to begin with or they spent all their money on attorneys trying to fight this problem. They've gone through years and years of trauma, being separated from their children and all these things. A lot of folks that have gone through this system don't have a lot of fight left in them, to try to get them to go out and volunteer and collect signatures and all those things. It's really, really difficult. And I think that, it's one of those things where I think everybody's vote counts. And I think that, if we can educate people and use, technology to get the word out to people, use traditional methods to get the word out to people, that this is an issue that people should very much care about, and they can, they can use their vote you know, to help decide. I think that that's the way that our system was designed, and that's how, you know, we need to get back to that, where our legislature and our legislators and our lawmakers are serving the will of their people.
That's right.
To put it in perspective, Tim Eyman recently started up an initiative for the $30 car tabs. He put down $500,000 out of pocket as a down payment to start that initiative. So for the initiative, to get one initiative through, you can buy races of multiple legislative seats. It's so expensive in Washington State.
And then my other question was just on, do you see much difference in custodial rights in like divorce cases versus just, you know, non-married parent cases? Is it skewed more in, you know, one favor? Like,
I haven't seen that data exactly, but anecdotally, I would say that when the parents aren't married, their rights are probably upheld even less. A lot of it depends on how much time that parent has had to establish a relationship with their child. So, you know, if you've been married to somebody for 10 years and you get divorced, you probably have a much stronger chance of staying in your child's life than if you have a child born outside of marriage. You know, there's all sorts of things that the mom can do to essentially keep the dad out of the child's life if that's their intention.
Kyle, can I play devil's advocate here?
Please do.
Just as a mom and, you know, a woman in the situation, I see most recently, because of the work I do, the male perspective, and the father's perspective. But I've had experiences in my own life, and I've heard numerous stories where there's a mother who, you know, the dad, the father, has the purse strings, has the control, has the good attorney, and uses custody in such a way to try to take the kids away from the mom and basically leave her penniless without the kids. I have seen that scenario. I've actually dealt with that myself. So my concern, I'm sure I'm not the first person that's brought this up with this 50-50 parenting. What sort of protections might there be to protect, you know, women that might be in that situation? Because it does happen.
So that's an excellent question, and I agree with you entirely. In fact, a lot of the folks that have worked with our organization are moms that are in that type of situation. In fact, one of the ladies that went around lobbying with me last year was a mom that was in that exact situation where, you know, her parental rights weren't upheld equally. And we've had people that have showed up at our rallies and spoken about that exact issue. Parental equality protects both parents equally. It says, look, both parents have a fundamental right to parent their child. And the court has a duty to uphold that unless there's some reason to deny that to a fit parent. And so it protects moms just as equally as it does dads. So I think that's a great question, but I absolutely, you know, respect the role of moms just as much as fathers, and I think it's important that we protect both.
You mentioned a case where a state legislature passed a bill and then it was vetoed by a governor. Bringing out a veto pen is a pretty extreme measure against anything. What sort of justification was used to wield a veto there, and what do you think motivated it if that justification doesn't match with the actual motive?
Man, that's a hard question, but that's a good one. It was the state of Florida. It was a bill that dealt with both alimony reform and the 50-50 right of both parents to have equal time with their child. Went all the way through, you know, both the House and Senate, was passed by the people, but then the governor vetoed it. And, you know, the word on the street is that, you know, it was basically the bar administration and other special interest groups that came in and said, no, we can't have this. We're going to lose way too much money. And that's, you know, why they believe that it wasn't passed.
Was there any public statement or justification from the governor? Or was it just, oops, pen slipped?
I'm not aware of a public statement that was made. There may have been one, you know, but it seems that all factors kind of point back to one thing when it comes to these type of things. And if you follow the money, there's always major financial incentives. I mean, there was a court case in, I want to say it was Indiana, that you know, just came out. There was or not a court case, but there was a bill that was being heard where the secretary of the Illinois State Bar Association came out and said, we can't have equal parenting because the state would lose too much money. He said it. It's on video. I'll share it with you if you want to see it. I mean, the facts are there, and that's what's happening. Yes?
I don't know if you've noticed, but in trying to contact some media companies, a lot of them have a blackout on family court stories. Like, you can even go to a court reporter and they'll tell you straight up that no matter how extreme the situation, they won't report on a family court story. I don't know if you've encountered that and what your thoughts are on that blackout.
I've been hearing that for years, and I'm not sure. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist. You know, I know a lot of people have said, well, the media doesn't want to hear it. I think the media is mostly driven by, you know, viewers and what it is that people want to see. So if it's a story that they think is going to get enough coverage, then the media covers it. I think that that's probably the predominating factor there. We have actually been getting a lot more stories in the media in recent years. Since I've been involved with this, I feel like there was very much a media blackout back in 2014, 2015, and now in 2018 we're seeing these cases come up on the media all the time. The thing that's going on down in California with the audit against the commission down there, they've been doing rallies down there in Contra Costa County, California, and there's a reporter from ABC that's been covering this. I mean, it's starting to make mainstream news media. So I have a feeling that we're going to see a whole lot more of that here real soon.
So I suggest you check out some of the tip lines from local stories, and you'll see that they actually have like notes that they don't want, and I'm just curious on that. But my other point, kind of follow up on that, is impeachment proceedings are done through the legislature. So I was curious what your thoughts are on taking like some really egregious misconduct by judges and commissioners, and having them go through an impeachment hearing.
I mean, I think they need to be held accountable. If they're breaking the law and they're violating people's fundamental rights, absolutely, I think they need to be held accountable.
Impeachment in Washington State is also very hard.
What do you think is the low-hanging fruit in
Yes
this
and no.
issue that someone could come in, take this on as their issue, and make a substantial difference?
Are you speaking in terms of helping out as kind of an advocate, or as far as legislation goes?
I would say I'd like to hear about both paths.
Okay, well, for those that want to get involved, I mean, like I said, we started an organization here. We hold rallies, we lobby the legislature in Olympia, we hold meetings with different legislators to try to get laws changed. There's all sorts of different organizations, both nonprofit organizations as well as organizations that are run through the state that are convening on these issues and getting in discussion. So to volunteer and get involved that way, I think is a great step. Meet your legislators and talk to them about these issues. Let them know that you find it important. I think that that's a good way to start. And then legislatively, the bills that I proposed were very deliberate because I believe that they are kind of the fundamental low-hanging fruit that we can address fairly easily in the legislature and make a big difference. The right to parental equality. I mean, it's a fundamental right that the Supreme Court has upheld throughout our entire history, not only in Washington State, but the U.S. Supreme Court. The data collection and reporting, I mean, obviously, we need to find a way to fund that, but that study that I provided earlier was actually a self-reporting system where they basically passed a law that said anybody that goes through a child custody case has to fill out this survey and turn it in. So we have this data it didn't cost very much to get that data together at all. So there are solutions if we want to do it. And I know that auditing that commission is going to be a very contentious issue. The commission down in California actually sued the auditor's office because they didn't want to be audited. They hadn't been audited in 56 years. So, it's not going to be easy. That's not a low-hanging fruit at all, but I think it's something that people need to know about. So, yes, sir.
I wanted to follow up on what Michelle said, just to kind of preemptively shoot down one conclusion people might come to, which is not factually supported. It is obviously true with the concern that Michelle raised. There is a reasonable concern that, you know, if you have an abuse situation, you know, the guy's completely psycho and, you know, wants to get back at his ex-wife, that he'll use the, you know, child custody to go after her. The reason that wouldn't be a good argument is because it is actually not the case that the majority of domestic violence situations are ones where the man's abusing the woman, and that's been debunked, and I just wanted to point that out just so nobody tries using that argument because it's a bad argument.
That's a good point to bring up, and I didn't really touch upon that all that much, but I'll just very briefly say that, you know, there are what they call limiting factors that are already written into the RCWs. The laws that we proposed do not impact the limiting factors at all. So if somebody is found guilty of domestic abuse, the court still has that discretion to make that decision. We're talking about in cases where there are no limiting factors that have been decided. But personally, I believe that if you accuse somebody of a crime, that should be happened by a criminal court where you have, you know, the full you know, due process of law and constitutional rights. I think that part of the reason why that's such a problem in the family court system is because, you know, it's somebody's accusing somebody else of a crime, but it's essentially being handled in a court system that's not should. I mean, they teach it in the state of Washington in the parenting classes, I mean, law and everything else. It's a good idea that you would have in a normal criminal court. So I think that would be a solution that we need to look at. If someone's accused of a crime, it goes through criminal court.
So there's actually seminars that they have to
Do these
attend
judges in
and
family
elected
court have to,
on a series of
or do they go
topics.
through classes
Seminars
for
they have
like
to go.
child development?
There are actual
know
printed
all this
manuals
stuff?
from the
Do
state of Washington.
psychologists know?
If they don't, they sure. No,
But-
that's a different class than the parents go through.
Yes. There's
Completely
specific
different set of
classes for
classes.
judges.
Yeah.
And just pick up on those manuals sometimes, particularly on family law and domestic violence. The language in there is completely biased. Honestly, after reading through one of those, it's amazing that they're not more biased on the stand. And a lot of these seminars that they go to are paid for by interested parties. So you get elected, you're supposed to do this seminar, and somebody's actually going to pay to send you off to this course, right? And it's a special interest group paid for by other things. But yeah, it's
Sounds
worth
like a
looking
bit of a
into.
conflict to me.
All the money.
Yeah, question.
So we can go back and find the bills that were introduced in previous sessions, but do you have any other bills that you're proposing? And if so, where can we go to find the language for that?
So we're still working on putting together the language for 2019. On my website, if you go to fcru.org, there's a link to HB 1554, which was the only one that we actually had
Yeah, well, that's on the
sponsored.
state legislature's website already.
Yeah. So, yeah, HB 1554 would be the one to look at. I believe that the language in there was pretty good, although I would like to make a few adjustments based on some of the other things that have happened around the country in other states and other bills that might make it a little bit more palatable to the folks that were kind of resisting us on it. But yeah, that's the one that I really expect is going to be sponsored again in 2019, and then the data collection and reporting. You know, I think that one and the Veterans Protection Act will probably be the next ones, but we don't have the writing for that yet. But they will be published on my website. You know, when we do. Yes, sir.
I think Albert Lee, the owner of Albert Lee Appliance, he's a friend of mine. He looked at all the bills I spent on family court. It was about $178,000 that bankrupted me to deal with their BS.
I know a guy who spent, he said all told was about $900,000, and he's from Seattle. I mean, it happens a lot.
Let me explain this to you. And it wasn't initiated by the ex-wife. It was initiated by the state of Washington and the court system. Because I'm a non-custodial parent.
And in this guy's case, it was very similar. That him and his ex got along for you know, the last half of that process. That a lot of it was the state, it was DSHS, it was DCS. They weren't giving him credit for money that was being paid and all sorts of other things. They wanted to settle, but they couldn't get out of the court system. Once the court system had brought them in, they you know, they couldn't get out of it. So. There's a lot of stuff that happens all across the legislature, all across the states. There's a lot of problems that need to be addressed. So Unless anybody else has any further questions, okay.
I just say start looking into more of the non-married individuals, because we're fighting that with a lot of the churches. In order to get our assistance, we are required to get married to them. We're going through the biblical procedures of people this day and age marrying are given in marriage, but that's not always so. Your maker is your husband. We're fighting marriage ourselves because it is a cost to the courts and it does cause divorces. So it would be good to look into those for non-married.
Yeah, okay. Appreciate the input. Yes, sir.
Have you looked at actually putting members onto the boards in the counties? And one
Which board specifically?
Oh, any of them that have to do with human services. And why I'm saying that is I sit on the 1/10% mental health and substance abuse sales tax board. And I can tell you that sitting in that position, all of the merry-go-round of the people that you're talking about come through there for grants.
Yeah.
That one gives you access to all their financials. Two, you can put forth exact questions, and they have to answer them or they don't get cash. And I can tell you can do a whole bunch of changing the conversation at the board level before it ever gets to a county commissioner or a city council's vote. You would be amazed at the amount of things. I've been sitting on this board for almost 5 years, and I can tell you there's about $5.8 million that didn't go for a vote because it never got past us. So one of the strategies that you might think about is actually embedding people in the boards and getting the proper conversation started.
Well, and that's actually something that I've been doing, is going to as many different council meetings and any sort of meetings that I can go to where people are going to have an influence at that level, because I think you're absolutely right. Having the right people in place that understand these issues is very important. It happens at all different levels.
Right, I'm talking about the boards below the councilmen or commissioners, because if it doesn't get to them, they don't have the opportunity to vote on it. Most of all of the stuff gets screened down here, not here.
Right, well, we're talking about state legislation primarily that I'm working on.
Same thing happens in the states.
Yeah.
What do you think relative to family court reform? What kind of boards will we be looking for there?
I can tell you right now, the family courts come through my board. They look for funding.
How so? Can you?
Last year, we did $400,000 for the funding for the courts.
Does King County have a mental health sales tax by chance?
King County.
Yes, yes, they do. But all I'm trying to do is, and I'm not trying to get really, really specific, but look at injecting people here. Rather than from the podium, and I do a lot of podium work too, but if you inject people here, this whole conversation up here changes.
Right. Well, it definitely needs to happen at all levels. I mean, it needs to happen on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level. You know, it's a big enough problem that we need to have these conversations. I would definitely like to talk to you a little bit more offline and kind of understand, you know, how you think that needs to happen and what's happening at that level as well.
Yeah, Michelle knows exactly how to run me down.
Okay.
He's from Kitsap, came to see you all the way from Kitsap.
Wow, all right, I appreciate you coming down.
I'm really depressed that our state is this corrupt. I was really Pollyanna for this last 2 years.
Oh, wait, it gets worse.
I know, you know, the reason I keep going and keep fighting the way it's either that or take a match to it.
It's
it's almost
fight or
to that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I get so frustrated with the court system. I told my husband, you know, he's, you know, an attorney, went through law school and all that. I'm not quite that jaded yet.
You're not jaded?
Him and I argue all the time about the fact it's just corrupted. We need to start over, clean house and start over. And you won't hear attorneys say, I mean, he and I argue because that's his profession of 20 years. What do you mean? It's this, sanctimonious. But I get so angry by what I see, just the blatant injustice.
I've had attorneys that have come out and said the same thing. You know, the problem, like you brought up earlier, is a lot of times, you know, they're risking their career by coming out and saying those things. If they don't want to play the game the way that it's been played for all this time, then they're out of the game, basically, and that's a real problem. That's a real problem, and I think that, you know, society is getting very, very frustrated with a lot of this. I mean, you look at all the things that have been happening across our country for the last couple of decades, and, you know, there's a lot of unrest among a lot of people, and they're very, very unsatisfied, I think, with the direction that things are going. So, I mean, I think the time is ripe for change. I really do.
Time to time in the tree of liberty.
Yeah.
I won't finish it.
There's a rumor on Facebook that the Seattle councilmen are trying to beat each other to who can say that the head tax might not be a good idea. They've gotten 4,000 emails apiece on people that are furious.
Only 4,000?
Oh, yeah.
I'm hearing a rumor that Lisa Herbold might be the first to bail.
Yeah, there's a PDF that says she drops her defense of it.
Hey guys, do we have any more questions for Kyle before we go?
I would like to share something with everybody in this room.
Okay, I was just going to turn off the video
Okay.
and everything when we're done. Thank you, and I wanted to thank Kyle for coming and joining us
I just want you guys
here.
aware of your surroundings. I got a phone call that a 16-year-old was raped at a tent city. The tent city blamed the child for the rape because she broke the rule of drinking alcohol. I took her to Swedish Hospital, and Pollyanna went to the King County Council, Dow Constantine, Pete Holmes, Mayor Murray, the state, and told everybody. Then I got another phone call, and a biracial girl's being told she has to sell food stamp cards, and I told her that's illegal at Safeway. She says she's forced into oral sex. I go through this again. I've got all my emails, all my documents. Not one of them has done anything about the abuse of women living homeless. And they keep saying they're good people. So just so that you're aware of your surroundings, these people are dirty. If you don't care about a child, you ain't nothing.
Totally agree with you. Thank you for bringing that up.
You take it
Yeah.
off.
I can't see at night. I can't drive at night. I can't see.
Well, thank you, Kyle, very much for joining us.
Can we give him a round of applause?
And can you throw out your number, throw out your website, info, anything right now before we go?
Oh, absolutely. So once again, my name is Kyle Paskewitz. I am running for state representative in District 27, Tacoma. You can support my campaign on kylepaskewitz.com. If you want to find out more about the family court reform work that we're working on, fcru.org is our website.
Thank you
so much.